Now the question arises, can you learn to be present? Or do you just have to wait for just presence to arise? No, you can learn to be present. If you're ready, then you can learn to be present. In daily life, in situations in daily life, you can learn to be present. I already, for example, mentioned in my first book, when you perform routine activities, which usually are just a means to an end, such as washing your hands, making a cup of tea, getting into your car, closing the door. There, you can use those routine activities and see if you can be completely present rather than use them as a means to an end, make them into an end in themselves. So when you wash your hands, you bring your awareness to the feeling of water, which may be warm or cold, on your hands, the soap that you're using, and you can feel the tactile sensations, one hand touching the other, and there's a scent perhaps coming from the soap. So you're completely present in that little activity. Your attention goes there to sensory perception. And giving attention to sensory perception takes you out of the unconscious stream of thinking. It takes you out of your mind and takes you also into the present moment. Presence and present moment are very closely linked. Presence is the state of consciousness, of being present in the moment, the only moment there ever is, the now. Your entire life is now. Whatever you experience, feel, do, think, whatever, is always now, has always been now, will always be now. So the now is extremely important in your life. So don't live as if the now were a secondary thing because the next moment is more important. There is no next moment. When the next moment comes, it's now. So presence is the awareness of now, and sensory perception, be aware of sensory perception, is extremely helpful in becoming present. So I would suggest it, be very conscious of all the sensory perceptions associated with, for example, washing your hands. Or let's say you're making a cup of tea or coffee. Do it consciously. Give your attention to the activity that involves your sense perceptions. Listening, you're filling the kettle. Sensory, tactile sense perceptions. And if you give your attention to it, so you don't make the activity into a means to an end, it becomes an end in itself. And that is actually a very pleasant thing to do. And the important thing is, it takes you out of your unconscious mind. It actually slows down your thought processes, and you may find even little gaps arising where you're not thinking, you're just perceiving. And that is pure presence, when you're not adding unnecessary thought to your sense perceptions. And so another one is waiting. Whenever you're waiting for something, instead of becoming impatient or every time get out your phone and look at the latest messages or tweets or texts or emails without compulsively doing that every time you're waiting at the elevator, waiting in line, waiting on the phone for somebody to answer. There's so many times when we are waiting every day, waiting to meet somebody, waiting at the traffic lights, waiting. And for most people, waiting is not pleasant. They try to get away from it. You can use, every time you're waiting for something, you can use it as an opportunity for entering the state of consciousness of presence. So, for example, if you're waiting, and this is just, you press the button for the elevator. Let's say it takes 1 minute or even half a minute for the elevator to arrive, and you're standing there. What do? Instead of daydreaming or getting out your phone, you're aware of that moment, of your visual sense perceptions. You're looking at that elevator door, your surroundings, and you become aware that you're breathing, and you become aware that you're alive inside your body. So you're breathing, you're alive, you're perceiving your surroundings, and that's where your attention is. Breathing. Can you sense some aliveness inside your body? And you're observing your surroundings. You're coming into the present moment. You're using this waiting period ultimately to get out of your conditioned mind and become aware of this moment and become aware of yourself in this moment. Become aware of your own awareness in this moment. And that's a very peaceful thing to do. You're driving, another example. You're driving, of course, there are many red lights where you have to stop. Use that as an opportunity for being present every time there's a red light. Give your fullest attention to what you're looking at. You're looking at the red light, but peripherally you're also aware of whatever else is around you. And again, put your consciousness on your breath. Feel the air moving in and out of the body. And you may discover things that are actually beautiful. There's trees there, people walking there, all the manifold expressions or manifestations of life around you. You're coming into the present moment. Some researchers have found that if you start driving at the age of 18, and you drive up to the age of 75, you would spend, I don't remember the exact figure, you would spend several months of your life waiting at red traffic lights. So don't waste all that time. Use it for in your spiritual, this is ultimately, we could call that spiritual practice. So there's a little space, you create little spaces. Ultimately, the spaces that you create in your life, they're extremely important, but ultimately the spaces are inside you. They're spaces inside your mind that you create. You're using external conditions to create more inner space, more inner spaciousness. And that's what you need. That is the arising of presence when you discover that there is a dimension in you that is very deep and spacious, where the person is actually transcended and something much vaster emerges. That's an amazing discovery. So many situations can be used in that way. Anything that you do consciously with attention to detail can bring in presence. And through this practice of presence, as presence arises gradually, you'll find your life, in many areas of your life, enormous changes and improvements. One is that that voice in the head that before created such an enormous amount of anguish and unhappiness doesn't do that anymore. So the negativity, that negative commentary that so many people experience as the conditioning of your mind, begins to subside, and you can be with events and situations in a non-dysfunctional way, so that you can be aligned with whatever arises in the present moment, and that includes relating to other human beings. You become less reactive or even non-reactive emotionally to situations that otherwise would have provoked an enormous amount of negative reaction. You're now able to be with them, and you can verify it when you meet, say, people you've known for a long time that you've had a dysfunctional relationship with, or family members, and then you meet them again at Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas dinner, and the same comments and criticisms that people make no longer have the power to upset you. You're able to accept that people manifest the behavior that corresponds to their level of consciousness, and that's all. Because you need some kind of sense of identity, and then naturally it's derived from the narrative about me and my life. And you may have noticed that the narrative of me and my life very often is not all that satisfying. There's always, for many people, it's a very unpleasant narrative. Things that they have an enormous amount of regret and resentment and guilt that becomes part of their conceptual identity of who they are, what people have done to you, and your failures, your successes, your failures. It's all concepts in the mind. The mental concepts, when you live through mental concepts and derive your identity from mental concepts, then you do the same to other people. Then you have concepts about who other people in your life are, which is again a conceptual identity. You manufacture a conceptual identity for every person in your life and every person you meet. Immediately you arrive at some kind of judgments about that person. That's very limiting, and as far as personal relationships go, it prevents you from ever truly relating to another human being, because you would be relating to the other human being through a veil of conceptualization. In fact, you relate to virtually everything through a veil of conceptualization, because there's this continuous mental labeling of your sense perceptions. So it means you are trapped in your mind. Your mind becomes a screen. It cuts you off. It cuts you off from the other human beings. There's not a true relationship. So that is deriving your sense of identity from concepts, and that, as you become present, that changes, and you then suddenly realize there is a deeper dimension in you that is more truly who you are than your personal history. That sense of awareness or presence is more truly and deeply who you are in your essence than what has happened in your life. Not that you completely forget what has happened. You still remember what has happened in your life. You remember your story. But you no longer look to the story to provide you with your sense of identity. Because your sense of identity comes now from a deeper place of the presence of consciousness. That's the shift. And that changes everything dramatically, because the conceptual identity is always in a state of lack and unfulfillment. It's ego, it's the egoic identity. It needs others it uses other people in an attempt to strengthen the conceptual sense of self. It needs to be superior to others in order to feel. It needs to feel superior to others, and so that it strengthens your sense of self in that way. The egoic conceptual identity is always looking to enhance its sense of self, which is deficient. How can I make myself bigger? And if you can't do it by being better than somebody else or other people, then you can do it by being more of a victim than somebody else. That's another big conceptual identity that many people have. They see themselves as victims of another person or victims of another group of people. Very common thing for people to have that type of conceptual identity. So all that creates an enormous amount of dysfunction and prevents you from truly relating to other human beings. When you no longer live through a conceptual identity, then the possibility of having truly satisfying and harmonious relationship with other human beings is there. You can truly relate to the other, free of the screen of conceptualization. And that's where love can arise, where empathy can arise, compassion can arise, all those things that make you truly human. And that is the only way then to change the world, because ultimately that's what it is. Everybody's looking for it. How can we change the world? Well, you cannot change the world unless there is a change in your state of consciousness. Nothing could be more important than that.